Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tracing a genuinely fascinating 130-year journey of how India's foundational economic blueprints were actually drafted. We often look at booming modern economies and kind of just forget that their massive scale didn't happen by accident. It literally took decades of vigorous debate, wildly distinct visions, and meticulous structuring. So today, we're going to unpack exactly how the foundation for one of the world's largest economies was laid.
Okay, let's dive right into this by asking the ultimate question of nation building. How on earth do you plan the economy of a future superpower? Think about it. When a nation transitions toward independence, its leaders aren't just picking out a flag or writing a constitution. They have to figure out how millions of people are going to work, produce, and ultimately survive. It's like a giant puzzle that requires an incredible amount of foresight. And as you'll see, there were some fiercely competing ideas on how to do this right.
To really understand this, we're going to journey chronologically through 5 key milestones. First, the meaning of economic planning. Second, early pre-independence visions. Third, the economic drafts of the 1940s. Fourth, the post-independence era. And finally, the drivers of economic growth.
All right, let's kick things off with milestone number 1, the meaning of economic planning.
Before we jump into the historical timeline, we really need to understand the basic mechanics that these architects were trying to manipulate. Basically, economic planning is all about conscious, thoughtful control to balance demand and supply. It's not just letting the market run wild, right? Planners have to look at what the country needs, the demand, and figure out how to match it with what the country can actually make, the supply. They do this by pulling the levers on either how goods are produced or how they're distributed among the population.
Broadly speaking, planners utilize 2 entirely different approaches to hit that balance, focusing on specific economic sectors or focusing on specific geographical regions. Sectoral planning might mean, say, deciding to pour resources entirely into agriculture for 5 years, or heavily subsidizing heavy industry. Regional planning, on the other hand, looks directly at the map. It focuses on developing specific areas. Maybe a coastal region needs better port infrastructure, or an isolated inland area desperately needs connectivity. Both are incredibly powerful tools in the planner's toolkit.
Moving right along to milestone number 2, early pre-independence visions.
This momentum didn't just happen overnight. Long before the country was free to implement these policies, some brilliant minds were already drafting the blueprints. Back in 1878, Dadabhai Naoroji was already advocating for the very idea of economic planning in his landmark article, Poverty in India. Fast forward a bit to 1934, and Sir M. Visvesvaraya published Planned Economy in India. And then, by 1938, the theory officially turned into organized action when the first attempt was made to develop a national plan, setting up the National Planning Committee under the chairmanship of Jawaharlal Nehru.
Now, what is truly mind-blowing here is Visvesvaraya's sheer ambition back in 1934. In his book, he didn't just offer up some vague theories. He presented a concrete, highly ambitious draft with a target to literally double the national income in a single decade. I mean, it just goes to show the extraordinary level of urgency and the sky-high expectations these early thinkers had for India's potential.
Okay, let's hit milestone 3, the 1940s economic drafts.
Picture this. As independence became a fast-approaching reality, these conceptual ideas just exploded. Different factions began rapidly drafting competing blueprints. We're not just talking about one unified group of politicians sitting in a quiet room. Industrialists, social reformers, political theorists, they were all fiercely debating what the soul of the Indian economy should actually look like.
Between 1944 and 1945, we see this sudden burst of diverse drafts. In 1944, under the editorship of Purushottam Thakur Das, 8 leading industrialists and technocrats formulated what became known as the Bombay Plan. Then, the very next year, in 1945, M.N. Roy drafted the People's Plan, while simultaneously, S.N. Agrawal drafted the Gandhian Plan. Just think about the incredible diversity of thought captured in these 3 distinct approaches, all within a tiny 2-year window.
To give you a sense of just how completely different these ideas were, let's zero in on the Gandhian plan for a second. While the industrialists behind the Bombay Plan might have been dreaming of massive factories and top-down infrastructure, S.N. Agarwal's vision, inspired by Gandhi, went in the exact opposite direction. His focus was entirely local. He advocated for a decentralized economic structure, which essentially meant empowering the grassroots level and turning every single village into a self-contained economic engine, rather than relying on sprawling urban industrial centers.
And that brings us to milestone 4, the post-independence era.
So, the 1940s debates were over. It was finally time to govern. Theories had to become active, nation-building policies. Right out of the gate in 1950, Jayaprakash Narayan offered the Sarvodaya Plan. This one placed a massive emphasis on agriculture, small industries, and cotton industries. It kept the focus firmly on the rural and the small scale, serving as this really powerful reminder of India's agrarian roots. The goal was to uplift all layers of society by prioritizing the very sectors that employed the vast majority of the newly independent population.
But here's the catch. You can't steer a massive country using 5 contradictory blueprints, right? The new Indian government desperately needed a way to synthesize the Bombay Plan, the People's Plan, the Gandhian Plan, and the Sarvodaya Plan into actual unified state policy. They needed an official body to sift through all these competing ideas and determine a clear, singular direction for future economic development.
So what did they do? Well, the Planning Commission was established in 1950 as that ultimate authority. By 1952, the National Development Council was set up to specifically approve their famous 5-year plans. And that institutional architecture completely dictated the rhythm of the Indian economy for over 6 decades, all the way until NITI Aayog took the reins in 2015.
Finally, let's hit our last milestone, drivers of economic growth.
Boiling it all down, when we look back at all these historical plans, what are the actual engines of growth? Regardless of the era or the specific ideology, the fundamental non-negotiables are pretty much always the same. You absolutely cannot balance supply and demand without the physical economic infrastructure to move goods. You can't execute a master plan without an efficient administration. A plan will completely fail if it doesn't secure the mass participation of the people. And lastly, technological progress is absolutely vital for the growth process to keep moving forward.
So as you analyze India's booming economy today, I want to leave you with this. Which of those early architects do you think left the most enduring mark on the modern blueprint? When you see the current mix of massive tech infrastructure sitting alongside sprawling rural agriculture, do you see the industrialists of the Bombay Plan, the rural focus of the Gandhian Plan, or maybe Viswesvaraya's sheer ambition? The debate that started over a century ago is, in many ways, still being written. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the blueprints around you.